Shall we? Feels like the start of a metal concert.
Way to get the audience woken up real quick if they're wearing headphones.
Policy session, which is entitled What Policies Should Countries Take to Reduce Smoking Rates? We know that right here in Panama with us, we have a conference that ostensibly is to reduce smoking rates in the world, but in reality, we know that the policies that they are currently pushing will in fact increase smoking rates. So in order to actually have policies that are known to be effective and proven to actually reduce smoking rates and improve public health, we are here with three experts to discuss these policies that work. So joining us, we have first of all Mark Oates, who is the director of We Vape and also the Snus Users Association. We have Will Godfrey, who's the founder and editor-in-chief of Filter magazine, who I think has been doing hands down some of the best reporting on these issues over the last couple of years. And we have Jeff Smith, who is a senior fellow of integrated harm reduction at the R Street Institute. And also, my name is Tim Andrews. I'm the director of consumer issues with Americans for Tax Reform and the Tholos Foundation. Formerly, I was with the Australian Taxpayers Alliance and Legalise Vaping Australia, and I am now a refugee from the hellish hellscape that is Australia, and I'm living in Washington, DC. So when we look at policies to reduce smoking rates, I mean, there's so much to look at, but let's just start, I think, with an overall top-down view of policies themselves, and then I think what we'll do is we'll delve into all of the debates, even amongst harm reduction advocates, as to best policies, like what are the best tax regulatory policies, what should we do about disposables, as we're seeing in the United Kingdom at the moment, and then we could possibly even go into things like, is there a role to limit some flavours or marketing? I mean, there are some tobacco harm reduction advocates who have said, well, you know, maybe we should still keep flavours legal, but maybe still limit their availability. So, and then we'll see where the conversation takes us. But first of all, Jeff, if I could, and then of course we'll also look at the role of products such as snus and nicotine pouches and things, because these are also, we need good policies for these as well. It's not just about vaping. So let's just start with a sort of broad overall view before we get into specific details of policies for harm reduction. And Jeff, if you could give us some introductory remarks.
Sure. You know, I think speaking from a U.S.-centric approach, you know, I don't think there is an example of a country who has gotten it right. We see, you know, little signals of countries that have been successful within reducing the smoking rates within their population. Everybody talks about Sweden as a primary wonderful example, and they are. But one thing that Sweden has done differently is really thinking about it from a cultural perspective. The snus pouch is innate to their culture. And so it was a product that kind of fit the consumers in order of giving them an opportunity to move away from a combustible product to something that was already part of their culture, not a novel product, a new product, something that somebody had to figure out what it was and why it was a relevant product on the list. So I think it's very difficult to kind of talk about good and bad. Well, I think it's in certain cases like Australia, there's ways to talk about bad. But you know, from a U.S. perspective, it's been kind of like the way I liken it to is that the regulatory environment is kind of in its adolescence right now. Really early on, when CTP was first established, even the leadership of the CTP would say that developing a regulatory strategy and regulatory approaches was difficult, was hard. It would take us years to figure out what the right path would be. At the time, I was working within the industry on the clinical teams, and one of our biggest complaints was that we didn't know what they wanted. Well, they didn't know what they wanted. And it's kind of like the saying that you'll hear in the United States, I can't define pornography, but I know it when I see it. That was really the CTP's approach through all this. And so after 15 years of being in the role of being the primary determinant of whether or not a product is legal to market in the US, they've seen, in using their words, millions of PMTA applications at this point. They've rejected the bulk majority of them But I think it's very careful when I say the word rejected. The overwhelming majority of applications didn't make it through the clerical review aspect of it. And so it's not like they're failing in scientific review. They're failing even well before they get to that process. And so it's not like they've really screened these products based on science at this point. They're really screening them based on whether or not they've checked all the right boxes and have an environmental assessment and all these other things that small companies may not have thought about doing as part of including in their packet. But where they have, the handful that actually have made it through the process, the Logic products, the Enjoy products, and the Views products, that gives people like me hope that there is a process. They've now seen the porn, and they can define it the way that they appropriately, because somewhere in those applications, the right studies were there. Now, did it require all of the studies? Does it require $100 million to generate a thousands and thousands of long page application for every product that exists? I would argue absolutely not. But within those studies, there are the right studies that are required in order for the FDA to make a distinction of whether or not it's appropriate for the protection of public health, a statement that is often used but never defined. The other aspect of it is we're going to talk about flavors as we go on throughout the day, but the reality of it is that they have, the FDA, CTP they have approved a flavor. It's very important to understand that when you talk about tobacco-flavored e-liquids, nobody's grabbing a tobacco leaf and bringing tobacco juice out into it. It's kind of like going to your local hardware store and asking for a gallon of paint. The components of any color paint is going to be made up of the red, the green, and the blue. Those chemicals are distributed within the paint in different ways to produce hundreds and hundreds of different types of colors. It's the same thing when it comes to artificial flavorings. The same components that make up tobacco will make up a cherry, will make up others. They're just distributed within the flavorants in different proportions. And so the construct of a banning of a flavor isn't a scientific question at this point, because they've approved artificial flavors that are already in the tobacco flavor itself. It becomes more of a marketing issue. Are you naming your flavor something that will attract a non-smoker or attract an underage individual to your product? So I think during these early stages, adolescence, if you will, I think there's reasons to continuously critique and evaluate and oversee what the CTP is doing in the U.S. But at the same time, I think there is equal hope that, again, I give a lot of credit to the larger industry, because when they have the millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars to invest into a extraordinarily over-scienced application, at least they have the money to do it. They can start moving the process through. And on the other side of it, when their applications are given MDOs, denial orders, they have that same wallet to sue and litigate the problem to get to the point where the FDA CTP is going to be held accountable for the decisions that they make. I think that opens the door and paves the pathway for mid-sized and smaller companies to make it through the process eventually. It's just going to take more time as the CTP matures and the industry matures to get it to that point. But that being said, in lieu of this moving more quickly, we have issues with illicit trade. We have issues with a product that's falling into the hands of underage individuals that shouldn't be using the product. And that really hogs the spotlight. And it makes it very difficult to have adult conversations from both sides of the fence, whether it's tobacco control or tobacco harm reduction, to get policies in place to move it forward in the USA.
So one thing that I just wanted to draw from that, we were looking at the FDA's policy, and the FDA does have that regulatory framework to be able to approve products. The fact that they've only approved 23 products, only tobacco flavored, and your point is well taken, it is still a flavor. But there is still that process in place. But there are a lot of concerns, as you raised, about the cost and the expenses of the problem. Now, I believe the United Kingdom has a much more streamlined system where there is still an approvals process, but it's basically you just need to meet certain guidelines and it's an approval. Could you maybe speak about how the UK system works? And then maybe we can have a short discussion on what would be the best sort of regulatory model to, if we still want to have a regulatory model, which I'm assuming most people on this, all of us would agree needs some level of regulation, like what an ideal regulatory framework would look like. And if the UK one does actually work as well as I've heard it does.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so the MHRA has a series of guidelines that you have to achieve, but it's, in effect, you're notifying the MHRA that you've gone through all the requirements yourself and you've got independent scientists to verify, etc. And so you submit that document and you tick all the boxes saying, yep, this has been checked, yes, we don't have that in it, and then it's basically accepted. So it is vastly more streamlined, and then there's an ability for you to then be checked over post-haste. So there was a Chinese company that was selling a product which had more than the legal allowed amount of e-liquid in. In effect, they were just giving consumers, some free liquid. It wasn't really a terrible thing, but it did break the rules, and we don't want people to break the rules. So there was some testing done, and then that was submitted by someone else to the MHRA, and then that was taken off the market.
So does the MHRA, do they do testing, random testing themselves?
Clearly, in that case, I understand that was a private company, maybe a competitor, I don't know, who maybe encouraged it, but that's quite normal. I think a lot of these, across a lot of markets, not just involved in this subject, there's a lot of competitors are testing to try and work out what people's products are and whether they're compliant. So I think that showed almost a little bit of a flaw with it. But as I said, the fact was that what they breached wasn't a matter of safety, because I think we can all agree the 2 mil limit is pretty ridiculous and stupid, and actually it's caused problems because we now have these 2 mil products which cause environmental problems because they're so small, whereas if you had a bigger product, you're going to have a rechargeable one, they're going to last longer, and also there'd be a price point which would mean youth would find it harder to access. So the 2 mil limit was a mistake, and rather than coming and trying to solve that problem, which would solve some of the youth issue, we're not bothering to do that. But we all know how hard it is to persuade government to change its position. But yeah, I mean, clearly the PMTA system is awful. Generally, the MHRA system has been successful, and the only sort of major breach to that was something which is negligible and doesn't impact on people's health.
So, Will, what about from what you've seen? Because I think you've covered, through Filter, quite a lot of different regulatory models in the United States. How would you sort of design an ideal regulatory framework?
Yeah, I mean, just sort of looking at the very broad picture. I mean, worldwide, as you know, you've got these maybe 3 different strands that are being demonstrated in different places. Kind of vapes in the UK, New Zealand, snus in Scandinavia. Heated tobacco products in Japan, South Korea, for example, but nowhere is pulling it all together and making all of them, easily accessible. And that's a big problem, because we know very well that people who are switching from smoking, everybody's different, everybody has different preferences and needs. A lot of people have to try a lot of different products until they find the one that works for them. And and these 3 strands provide different things that different people may be seeking. If you're seeking, inhalation, hand-to-mouth movement, then vaping is probably a great option. If it's just the nicotine, then snus has got a very, extremely low risk profile as well. If you like the taste of tobacco, then maybe heated tobacco products are right for you. And so, nobody is pulling it together. And as so many people have said while we're here, principally, they must be regarded as consumer products. You put them out there with sensible, light-handed regulation, and combine that with accurate information about risk profiles of all nicotine products, and let it happen. What I would add to that is I completely agree with that. However, there is real urgency here, because every year so many more people are dying. And so, yes, we should, I'm talking ideal world stuff, obviously, but we should put them out there, let it happen. And in addition, we should use targeted programs that are directly aimed at the populations that are smoking at exponentially higher rates than other groups. Turning to medical, I mean, I think all of us, certainly I am completely opposed to the exclusive medicalization of vapes and other tobacco harm reduction products. Having said that, I don't object to them being available medically in addition to from retail outlets. It could be a way for some people to feel trust in the products if they're recommended by doctors. It could, for example, with the NHS, it could reduce cost barriers for some groups if people can get them prescribed without having to pay out of pocket. So yes, that can be a tool if it's in addition to and not Australia style. And then finally, at Filter, we've reported on a number of really innovative programs that reach out to people with the highest rates of smoking, and those groups include people in prison, provision of free or subsidized vaping products to people there would be, not using prohibitions and punitive policies, but just incentivizing the healthier choice for people. I've also, we've published work about programs that encourage smoking cessation, including through vape provision during pregnancy, for example, which I think is in a couple of local pilots in the UK. I believe there's also been a food bank pilot. Each of these is reaching out to particularly significant populations. Another very significant population that's my work is concerned with a lot is people who use banned drugs other than nicotine, who again smoke at very high rates. For example, we have these harm reduction programs in many places in the world that provide sterile syringes. What an obvious opportunity to, at the same time, offer people a vape when the majority are smoking. And we've also, we just published a piece the other day about extremely high rates among people experiencing homelessness as well. And so I think, yes, put them out there, sensible regulation, accurate information, really amplify that, give everyone the opportunity. But also then, I think, because of the urgency and because we know the best places that could be targeted for tobacco harm reduction, I think add some programs that speed up that process. That's an ideal world scenario for me.
Can I just come in on Will's first sort of point around all the products, because I think that's really important. And you mentioned how Japan has been incredibly successful on heat not burns, Sweden on snus and nicotine pouches, UK on vaping. And you're absolutely right. If one country could put that together, I'm hopeful, maybe Argentina, then you could get down to smoke-free very successfully. I'm very confident that if the right policies were put in place in the UK, you could achieve smoke-free extremely quickly. Misinformation could solve a big problem because 54% of smokers don't know whether it's safer or think that vaping is as bad as smoking. The numbers suggest that equals about 1.5 million smokers not switching. And then heat not burn, because it's a tobacco product, you can't advertise it in the same way you can a vaping product, which is frustrating because it should be based on how harmful a product is, not whether it's got tobacco in or not. The result is that people in the UK do not know, smokers do not know about heat not burn products. And heat not burn products offer a really good opportunity for people that try vaping, but it just doesn't give them what they got from a cigarette. Heat not burn is the closest thing to a cigarette. And heat not burn, if we had, as consumers as aware of that product as vaping, another million could come off quite easily from the smoking rate. And then oral nicotine products, again, snus is illegal. If snus was legal, it'll take a while, but eventually oral nicotine will come in and you can shave off another million or so from that. So just on those few policies, you've got 2.5 million. Particularly having pack inserts would be great to inform the consumer of the scientific facts. Government-led, independent information, and all the pack inserts could be funded by the tobacco industry. They would pay for them, but the information would be independent. Go try a nicotine pouch, a vape, or a heat-not-burn product. That would be fantastic. I want to just jump this on its head really quickly, because we're talking about what policies work really well. But there's a magician in the UK, I think he's a magician, Darren Brown. He can make people read his mind. I'm just wondering, is he illusionist? I'm just wondering if I can make people watching and you guys at the audience work out what I'm thinking, what country I'm thinking of, that is following the FCTC pretty well, probably one of the best countries following the FCTC, but yet really is an abject failure on these policies, and they're a developed country. You know, any guesses what country I could be thinking of?
All the signatories of the FCTC?
It could be any one of them. They're a developed country. They're starkly against harm reduction.
I mean, Australia would probably be the best example of a policy failure.
Yeah, see, I'm an illusionist. I can make you think of
The
country
gentleman
I'm
from
thinking of.
Australia pointed out that Australia is...
Yeah, and just, what policies make Australia such a failure? One that jumps to me, I don't know what you guys think about, is access.
Mm-hmm.
You know, is that perverse? Will, is it perverse that cigarettes are more accessible than reduced risk products? I mean, I can't get over that.
Yes, it is utterly perverse. You know, a parallel that we come across in our work in the United States is that methadone is so harshly and punitively regulated, controlled by the DEA, which makes methadone a lot harder to get than fentanyl. You know, it's I think perverse is exactly the right word, Mark. Yeah.
I saw I think online yesterday that Australia is now concerned about nicotine pouches and is going to ban them again. They're already banned, but we're just going to doubly ban them
again.
in the same way as I think Australia's banned disposables sort of 6 times, vapes about 6 times now, and every time prohibition fails, they're just going to prohibit even harder.
Well, you know, I think some very good points have been made along the way, but there's a couple of points that I worry about quite a bit. One is the medicinal route. You know, within the United States regulatory process, as burdensome as it is to get a product through CTP, it's multifold more challenging to get it through CEDAR, and I think that could almost be used as a herring to continue to delay the movement of tobacco harm reduction by suggesting that you go. I think when Juul was a young company, they said a lot of things about how it helps their consumers stop smoking, and that ended up being one of the key variables that put Juul into a position of defense instead of offense in terms of building the brand and building the products. So the other thing is, you know, I struggle with, you know, I am a strong proponent of harm reduction principles. It doesn't matter what the source of the harm is. Anything we can do to help improve the quality of life for the individual who is engaging in that risky behavior, we should do. But I think there is a distinction between tobacco harm reduction with opioids and methamphetamines versus tobacco harm reduction. Regardless of the route of administration for the opioid, the harm is caused by the drug that it's delivering. It's the opioid. And the changes in the individual that the drug itself initiates. With tobacco harm reduction, it's not nicotine. It is combustion tobacco. And so when you start to think about the continuum of risk, if you think about, it's not tied necessarily to the drug that the individual is enjoying through using the product. It's the route of administration that matters. So we should, in reality, be much easier to make the argument, because we're not looking at, you know, trying to save the life based on their continued exposure to the drug. We're saving the life by just simply removing one route of administration. And by doing so, again, we're not talking about a couple dozen people. We're talking about 8 million people across the globe. And you can talk about needle exchange programs, safe injection locations, drug testing kits, and drugs that reverse the effect of overdose within the toolkit for opioid harm reduction and other type of drugs of harm reduction within drugs. But with tobacco harm reduction, it's just simply saying, put this down, and here's 40, 50, 60 other ways to get access to the drug that's not going to create the health problems that the primary product choices of the past have created for you.
I'll just have to respectfully differ,
Yes.
if I may, on the
I love that.
I don't want to go too off topic, but on the characterization of some of the other drugs. You know, I would characterize most of those harms as associated with the prohibition of those drugs and therefore the circumstances in which they're used,
I
as
would
you
agree
can
with
see,
that.
for example, with heroin-assisted treatment
Sure.
programs in Switzerland. And so I wouldn't, I mean, I personally think it's quite important that, that advocates for harm reduction associated with all drugs make common cause rather than drawing such distinctions. Where I completely agree is in terms of the delivery mechanism of nicotine being made safe.
And I don't want to come off as, I may have overly generalized to the point where it sounded like I wasn't in support of these others. It's very, very complex and very, very similar approaches across the board to save lives, and that's a priority.
I think you've both jumped on a really important point, which is the harms of prohibition. And that's something that the FCTC, the World Health Organization, governments like Australia, governments like Great Britain completely ignore. Prohibition in itself can create harms. And, you know, you could take another product which is very similar, a mild stimulant like nicotine, and prohibit it, as has happened in history, such as caffeine, and you would create harms alongside. Not the actual product necessarily, but the world around that comes with it. You know, crime, the fact you can't go to the police when someone steals your 10 tons of high-strength coffee you've imported from Colombia, so you're going to go around with your stolen illegal shotguns and shoot some kneecaps. I think, actually, you could take a product which is very mild. Sugar, for example, if you prohibited that, you know, I think there would be a market for sweets. That would be criminal and dangerous, and so prohibition itself is something that people need to recognise and is currently being wildly ignored by the FCTC, by governments, and they always seem to claim that the arguments about prohibition and the black market are just some sort of argument put forward by industry, but these arguments being made by the people on drugs for years, you know.
Well, if you're the entity that's imposing prohibition, then you can understand how it's very attractive to seek the sources of harm in all sorts of other places rather than lay it at your own door. But yeah, I mean, we've got a piece by a compatriot of yours, Dr. Colin Mendelsohn, coming out next week about some of the harms of vape prohibition, which it effectively is in Australia, which include, of course, violence that's associated with illicit markets, and prohibition, it becomes a sort of a self-worsening mechanism in that respect, among others. There was research published in the International Journal of Drug Policy some years ago, and I think in other places, that indicated that actual drug law enforcement increases violence associated with the illicit market by removing certain powerful local actors from the trade, you're actually creating a power vacuum and instability in those markets that then a struggle ensues to control them. And so, yeah, it's a self-worsening mechanism. Sorry, Tim. Yeah.
So do any of you think there is any grounds for any sort of prohibitions? For instance, some harm reduction advocates would still say, well, let's still ban disposables. Or some harm reduction advocates would still say, you know, there are some flavors we probably shouldn't allow. Is there any prohibition that you can think of that you would potentially support, or is prohibition always a failure?
You know, I'll put the question back on you. Can you come up with a single example where prohibition has worked?
No.
So,
I would answer no to this
you're
question.
setting us up for the question, and the reality is it's a softball, because there really isn't examples that exist anywhere where prohibition has actually worked to change human behavior. When you try to over-regulate human behavior, it always ultimately fails. And how it fails will either be through the citizens rising up and getting the policies changed, or it fails because the citizens rise up and create violence and environments that still allow for access. They fight for the access one way or the other. So I don't think there is a conversation that allows for prohibition. I don't think there is any flavor that should be prohibited. Now, I think there should be marketing regulations in place so that you don't create a product that is targeted toward any one group or another group in an unfair manner. And so I do think that there is some validity to having marketing rules in place that don't allow you to build a vaping device that looks like a SpongeBob SquarePants or something along those lines. But at the same time, if the product is superior and consumers want to have access to use it, there's other ways to build the device so that the product itself is able to be accessed by the individual. But at the end of the day, I think every country is going to have to make decisions that are relevant to their culture and to their citizens. But I don't think there's a need I don't think there's any positive outcome that will arise from something where somebody outright bans something for one reason or another.
Yeah, I mean, just want to be clear, arguing against prohibition isn't arguing against regulation of some kind. And in many ways, what you're doing when you prohibit, you're installing the greatest amount of regulation, but actually also creating a market where there is absolutely no regulation. And incentives not to have any kind of testing of products and things. Now, things like ingredients should be regulated. We know from things like diacetyl is a product, an ingredient that shouldn't be in. We know from the Avali illegal THC issues, the vitamin acetate shouldn't be in it. So there's definitely a space for regulation. But it has to be good and well thought out. And also remembering the more regulation you bring in, you might not prohibit, but you might encourage and incentivize the black market. Same for taxation as well. It's a sort of sliding scale. In terms of disposables, okay, so we have an issue in the UK, well, the media certainly thinks so, of youth vaping. Now, if you look at the numbers, the number of regular underage people vaping is very similar to the number of people my age smoking when I was at school. Not when I was at school at my age, So for some reason, it's creating much more of a moral panic that my generation was smoking 10, 15%. I mean, I think if you went and asked people at school, it's probably 80, 90% of everyone smoked cigarettes now and again. But for some reason, this is creating a greater moral panic. I think that's because it's a new technology. I call it new technology bias. So you'll see in the newspapers when a driverless car crashes all over the news. But when a human-driven car crashes, no one cares. Because it's new, it's interesting. So that's a bit of a problem. There's the environmental issue of disposable products as well. But both those issues can be solved by, number one, making a deposit return scheme for the product, maybe just £1. And then you'll find everyone bringing back their products so they can get £1 off the next one they buy. Having some regulations around how easy it is to recycle them, make it easier for those organizations that are doing that. And then in terms of the youth access issue, licensing system for people who are selling vapes, you'd pay a fee of around £300 to get a license. Within that license, you'd have to go through a sort of an easy enough course that wouldn't put people off, but you'd make sure that people are aware of the regulations. You'd use that as an opportunity to inform retailers. £300 is around 80,000 to 100,000 retailers in the UK. That's £24 million for trading standards to enforce age verification checks, and also they're selling legal products. And bigger fines if you sell to underage people. So right now we've had fines of £30 to retailers for selling to under 18s. I mean, that's not putting anyone off, is it? But those fines should be prohibitive, and thousands of pounds. And I know vapors, I surveyed vapors, and they said if a retailer continually sells to underage children, knowingly, that the end result after multiple fines should be jail time. So vapors feel very strongly about this as well.
I think it's really important to understand that, again, pro-THR is not anti-regulatory oversight. I think the history of the FDA is that, and I think this is where it's kind of gone south in the U.S., is that the FDA never really started to regulate something. They were established because there was a problem, and there needed to be some level of oversight and regulation to ensure that that problem doesn't grow or doesn't get worse. The problem with the CTP's approach is that the problem never had a chance to, if there's a problem with these reduced risk products, it never had a chance to manifest itself naturally within the consumer base. There were battery problems, back in the early days of vape, and again, the questionable ones around popcorn lung with diacetyls and EVALI, again, being confused as being a nicotine product as compared to other products. But there hasn't been that outbreak of negative health impact of the presence of these products in the marketplace for the FDA to effectively react to. And so in the absence of that, they generate what they think is a risk that they're trying to alleviate that doesn't really exist. But I will say that the regulation is important in the sense that we want these devices are electronic devices, so we don't want the batteries exploding in the pockets. We do want oversight to make sure that the constituents within the liquids are consistent. Again, that's for consumer protection, but also for consumer value as well. You don't want to buy one product one day and then 2 weeks later the product has different flavors, different makeup of its components. So there's good quality regulatory approaches I can take, and if something were to go sideways in the consumer base, having an ability to quickly respond and react to it, so that the appropriate product removal from the marketplace can happen quickly and efficiently. So I think again, I go back to the idea of an adolescent. My adolescent years, my parents didn't know what to do with me because I was a crazy adolescent kid. And I feel almost as if the folks on the policy side of the world are kind of having to act as that parent. We still love our kid. I'm not going to say we love the FDACV, but we understand the responsibility we have to make sure they continue to mature in a way that's going to lead to a productive adulthood. And I think if we hold them accountable and we put the spotlight on when they do things that are positive for the consumer base, as rare as that might be, we emphasize that that's a positive outcome from their agency, and when they are making the mistakes along the way, quickly point it out and try to get policies in place to help put them back on the right straight and narrow. Again, when you talk to the leadership and interact with the leadership at CTP, it feels like it's a very difficult thing to do because they don't feel like they're listening to us. But when you talk to the people on the ground at FDA, the ones that are actually working and doing the scientific review, they're as passionate about solving this problem as we are. But it just gets to the point where they can't talk to us as open and freely as again, if you've ever seen an employee of the FDA present at a conference, they are literally reading the slides because that's what's been approved by their legal, and that's what they're allowed to say. Anything outside of that, they have the disclaimer for it in order to protect themselves. So I think it's a challenging time in the development in the U.S., but at the same time, we've gone through some bad times already. It's just a matter of getting to the point where we get to the point where the consumers are put first and the products are in their hands to help them save their lives.
It's interesting that you mentioned about the FDA people aren't allowed to deviate to a script and sort of those good as, because when we look at policies countries should take to reduce smoking rates, I would argue that one of them should be that vape stores can communicate accurately with their customers. At the moment, it is illegal for a vape store owner in the US or Canada to hand their client a scientific study. Like, you can't essentially take the conclusions of an academic paper and tell it to your customers, which seems to be insane. Like, how can you adequately communicate information and inform people? Like, I believe if a customer goes and asks for cigarettes, the person can't say, well, according to the science, if you switch here, it will be better for you. Like, this seems very, very counterproductive.
Yeah. And I think recently there's been a lot of states that are requiring that any vape shop also sell NRTs. And I think that's actually not really a bad thing, because if somebody comes into my store and says, well, what are those things, those patches? Do they work? Well, they can very easily say, well, it works in 3% of the population. And, well, what about vapes? Well, we have so many customers, a lot of them say that it's been important in helping them make the transition away from combustion. It allows for the conversation to take place. I remember a time when, very early on in the vaping days, that you were able to walk into a vape store and try product. Right? In the U.S., you would be able to walk in the door, look around, they would have a clean cartridge for you, a clean product for you, let you take a puff and see if you like it. Now again, laws were put into place to not allow for the vape stores to do it. So they started selling it for 1 cent a puff. And so, I mean, again, I'm very, I have great admiration for the small businessmen and their ability to figure out, well, even with all this complexity coming down in terms of changing laws and changing climate for these products, we can find a way to get the message out to the consumer and help them when they come across the thresholds to at least see what the diversity of the products are that are available to them and give them some guidance in terms of making the decision without having to say, this product will help you quit smoking, because they can't say that.
And it's really, you mentioned nicotine pouches. I mean, yes, if you're in that very, very small minority that traditional NRT works, go for you. But, you know, I was recently speaking to a good friend of mine. Like, this is somebody who is a good friend, who knows me, knows what I do, and he wanted to quit vaping. So, you know, he was a heavy dual user, but he wanted to quit vaping. So he was using nicotine pouches, but he was finding that he wasn't getting enough nicotine from the nicotine pouches. They weren't working for him, so he was supplementing the nicotine pouches with combustible cigarettes. But this is the level of, I think, misinformation out there. And this is somebody who, like, is good friends with me, like, knows, like, has heard me speak about it, but hasn't, like, the misinformation is just so strong that...
Well, and again, we've said multiple times this week that if we consider physicians to be the top of the hill in terms of education and understanding, and if the overwhelming majority of them still think that nicotine is a problem, how can you give any hope to a lay person who's a trade worker or someone that doesn't have the experience and education that a physician might have?
And there was a study that came out in Australia yesterday. I've only read the abstract because it was yesterday, but it was essentially surveying physicians' attitudes towards prescribing e-cigarettes, because that is the only way you can get it legally in Australia. And essentially, as we all know, most doctors just said, no, we will not prescribe this. So people will keep smoking and whatnot because the only legal way of is cut out for them. So I noticed that we're running fairly close to our to our closing time. What do you think? Because we spoke quite a little bit about that sort of integrated harm reduction toolkit, one that encompasses everything for sort of minority populations. And I think New Zealand was one that also is, I think, where harm reduction started very much with the Maori population and their smoking rates, if I recall correctly. That's so, and you know, I love the idea of charities, like if you're looking after people like soup kitchens and things, providing them with reduced risk products. I'm not sure if outside of those sort of trials by the UK government, is anyone doing that?
I know with homeless people have worked to hand out reduced products to them. There's something interesting on that, which is agency. And I think a lot of people in public health struggle a little bit because they're so used to prescribing the answer. And I know in the UK they struggle because they're very supportive of vaping, but don't really understand why vaping is successful, because it's tobacco harm reduction led by the consumer. And because of that, they don't look to branch out and look at the other products that would be really helpful. But people feel they get a lot of agency when they're the one that's improving their health. And, you know, for a lot of people that are homeless with mental health problems, being able to say to someone, I've done this myself. I've done this. No one's told me to do this, but I've improved my health, and that's really vital. So, yeah, they will always struggle with the fact that this has been a consumer-led movement. Yeah. But it wouldn't have been successful if it had been a prescribed movement, because the product wouldn't have been able to tailor itself to the demands that the consumer want. But there's nothing wrong with consumer harm reduction. You know, everything is harm reduction. When you go and do exercise, you're buying products which are not medicalized products. They're consumer products, but they're going to be good for your health if you're running on a running machine rather than sitting on the couch. And doctors seem to have a big fear here, that they seem to really want a medicalized product they can have sort of confidence in without realizing they're telling their patients to do all sorts of things where there's no medicalized product for it. They're telling them to go and do more exercise. I mean, exercise is harm reduction. Exercise is not without risk. People die doing marathons. Doesn't mean you shouldn't encourage people to do exercise.
One actual question for you in terms of, because I think, you know, one of the key points is, you know, different products work well for different people, and, you know, snus workable culture in Sweden. Why are nicotine pouches illegal in so many countries? Like, this is something I was recently doing some work in following the debate in Uzbekistan, of all places, where they have Nazva, which is a pretty high-harm oral product. And so what the government is now doing is it's implementing from May a ban on nicotine pouches while keeping that legal. And I'm just wondering, given the fact that a lot of these oral products, the harm risks are negligible. I mean, if you look at the chemical profiles of nicotine pouches, there are fewer chemicals in them than there is in nicotine gums, which are prescribed. But yet they're still illegal in Europe, most of the world. And I don't understand. This is one that, I mean, I can at least understand e-vapes look like cigarettes, therefore I don't like them. But why so much anger towards nicotine oral products?
Again.
From my perspective, I think there's two things. One is that it is extraordinarily affordable as compared to the barrier of entry to get into reduced risk products. So it's going to be accessible by all levels of the population. The second thing is that it's clandestine. I've had a snooze in this entire time. Nobody's stigmatized me for using the product because they can't see the product. So if you can't see the product and it's inexpensive, it becomes clearly people that shouldn't or haven't used nicotine will be able to get access to it, and nobody will be able to control for that, right? And so even the modified risk tobacco product application process has become extraordinarily difficult because you're right, there is, I would say, equivalent risk between a snooze pouch and an NRT, a patch. But you can't talk about them the same way because one has a stamp of approval and the other one doesn't. So I don't think there is any logic. I don't think there's any scientific validity to anyone banning a snooze pouch. It's just the reality of the fact that if I can't control it, if I don't know that you're using it, then there is this fear that there is some unknown risk that could arise from it that they won't be able to control. Yes.
I just want to jump in, and I think there's a negative connotation on nicotine pouches because of the wrong negative connotation on Swedish snus. Really, this is the UK's fault. Hands up. Edwina Curry, one of our ministers at the time, she was very important in banning Swedish snus in the UK and then persuading the EU to follow. And that was really about a company called Skol Bandits who came in and they were trying to sell the product, and they used a bit like Juul in some ways, a bit like Red Bull. They didn't really understand the market, and they tried to encourage a kind of ambassador program with young people, and there was a moral panic in the 1990s and late 1980s about young people. Now, actually, if we'd allowed that product, we could have saved hundreds of thousands of lives in the UK and probably millions in the EU. I think the numbers are in the millions if we'd never made the EU ban snus. So I think it's because of the negativity around Swedish snus, there's a negativity around nicotine pouches. But we can't make the same mistake. The EU should not make the same mistake. They've killed people, literally, by banning Swedish snus. We can't do the same thing with nicotine pouches. Yeah.
Just to jump in on the youth use point, play devil's advocate a little bit, and perhaps it's a tangent, but it is obviously around the world. It's kind of the tail that's wagging the policy dog, and I think that there are questions to ask ourselves about the extent of the net harms at a population level of youth vaping. I understand in many places it's impossible politically to advocate for youth vaping, but when you see, again, and we've published work about this, but when you see graphs of youth smoking declining at an accelerated rate as youth vaping took off, and when you consider that there are youth who smoke every day, not nearly as many as there used to be, but there are, and then do they not deserve the same harm reduction options as adults in that position? And so when Mark's talking about age controls, and I'm certainly not advocating for unrestricted youth access, but I would personally say that for youth, vapes should be easier to get hold of than cigarettes. And maybe there's a role, I don't know, for sort of prescription access for youth who smoke regularly, or some kind of, if I had a teenager who smoked every day, I would buy that teenager vapes. And so I think, yes, while we're talking in certain political arenas, obviously there are talking points that will and won't work, but among ourselves, I think it does behove us to question the sort of the youth vaping outcry a little bit.
I think that needs to be commended. I think youth is considered the third rail. Nobody wants to touch it in terms of talking about the positive aspects of tobacco harm reduction. There's data that's screaming that we're seeing a reduction in youth use across the country where reduced risk products are available. And that should be celebrated instead of pointed as an example of the problem associated with the problem. So I think more and more individuals that are involved in science, more individuals that are involved in the communities, more individuals that are involved in policy learn to eloquently communicate that it's not necessarily a bad thing if a kid is smoking a vape because they're not smoking a cigarette. I think that argument will hopefully start to change the conversation, at least around the youth.
I think if we're going to be really factual about it, if my teenager starts consuming coffee, what are the harms of that? Well, the only harm really is that over your lifetime, you're probably going to spend a fair bit of money in Starbucks. Same with alcohol. As long as you're not a problem drinker, and alcohol has a lot more problems than safe nicotine products. But ultimately, if you do consume it safely, then the cost, mainly because of the taxation, is going to be your biggest burden. Does that mean it's worth me spending time and energy trying to stop my child using caffeine or using alcohol? No. And actually, when you look at safer nicotine products, over the life, the only thing is you're going to buy a product quite a lot. But we've got to buy something, and my life is better for using nicotine. I think, should we allow, I don't think we should allow youth access. In the UK, there's basically, you can't buy caffeinated drinks under 16. I don't think it's actual law. I think it's basically a sort of retailer and product company decision. But good retailers, you're not meant to buy Red Bulls, for example. Now, I see teenagers buying Red Bull all the time. Actually, teenagers using Red Bull and teenagers using some safer nicotine products are the same level of risk, but one creates a massive moral panic. Having said that, 5 or so years ago in the UK, there was a huge moral panic about how these kids were drinking Red Bulls and they're addicts and they had to have Red Bulls to be in the classroom. The exact same thing's happening with caffeine, with nicotine. That moral panic died away, and I think it will die away with this subject.
I think the only analogy would be that within the development of the adolescent brain, I would equate nicotine and caffeine to be equally as risky, very low risk, right? The same way I wouldn't want kids using caffeine in a manner where they're having 4 or 5 of these large drinks that have caramel and whipped cream and sugar and all the other things that make it palatable for some kids, but they end up being a 1,500 calorie bomb times 5 times a day. So again, if they're going to drink black coffee, that's fine. There's very little risk whatsoever. It's the same argument with tobacco and nicotine. If you're going to smoke it, tremendous amount of risk. If you're going to vape it, if you're going to snooze it, very, very low risk, and it's probably the safer way to go.
It seems that we have now run out of time. I will say that on that issue of youth usage, if any of you haven't seen Professor Colin Mendelssohn's talk at GTNF about this, I would strongly encourage it, because it was very much, this is a complete moral panic, and he said what I think a lot of people think, but very few of them actually advocate in public, as you just said, well, the reason that it is so politically unpalatable. And it was also funny because Brian King was on the stage next to him when he did this talk. So
did not feel very comfortable. Dr. King was not very comfortable at all.
So I think that is available online, so I would encourage you to watch that. And I think now it is time for our next session. So thank you very much to our co-panelists, to my panelists.
Thank you.
33.
Right, hi everyone, we're back again,
from
and this is
Costa
the
Rica.
final scheduled session of the conference. We've had a change of schedule. At 3 o'clock we're going to have a closing session, which will be quite informal. We're going to have questions from the audience, so if you've got any questions, send them in however you can, or via YouTube or via Twitter, and we'll get your questions asked of the experts here. We're going to talk to the experts themselves, see what they've thought of the past week and what impact we've had and what they might have learned or what they might have shared. And we're also going to be hearing some stories of consumers who've quit using safer nicotine products. So come up for that. That should be a bit of fun. It's going to be a nice, relaxing end to the conference. But for now, I want to introduce you to Maria from Canada. Who else we got there? Jeffrey from Costa Rica, Thomas from Mexico, and Kurt from South Africa. And we're going to be discussing what do consumers need to do in 2024 and beyond. Now, obviously, it's in the lap of the gods, really, what happens at COP10. We won't really know until the final report's coming out, and they're still discussing, and I expect they'll have late nights tonight, and they might even be postponing the final plenary until 3 p.m. Eastern time tomorrow. Who knows? And that's when we'll find out where COP11 will take place. But for now, we're going to talk about what we're going to be planning to do as consumers in the coming year or so. So, Maria, do you want to give your thoughts of how the land might lie post COP10 and what consumers should do or continue to do in the next year or so?
I think we need to remember that most independent shop owners, most independent shop owners, most independent e-liquid manufacturers, let's take big tobacco out of this, because I think they're only, what did someone say? They're like 12%. 12% of this industry. Let's take them out. I think we need to look at what stages and what platforms are the businesses going to help create for the consumers. Because when you look at businesses, especially post-COVID, there's a lot about, what are you giving back? Like, what type of charity are you giving back? How are you conserving energy? What type of carbon emissions giving back? I think what we need to do is set an expectation that these small businesses need to find ways to go back to the basics and be that community and be information hubs for consumers. We need to be able to use the network of shops around this world, of independent shop owners, to be able to use that as our information source. So what's happening, if something's going down in South Africa, you should be able to, get on the line. And these shop owners should realize that, and I was a shop owner, and I did realize that, and I know it's hard. And it's not about shoving information down consumers' throats. It's about making them aware. And how hard would it be if you send out an email, you throw in what's happening with advocacy in your country or in your community, or giving out information. And I know it's hard in some countries like Mexico. I don't know if the people who run that, but I'm just saying is that the businesses that are in it, trust me, if you have consumers and you're educating your consumers and they're well aware of what's going on, your business will stay around a lot longer, because people want to access these products, and people will access these products if they're still available. But if you get regulated and, if COP10 decides that this is not a tobacco harm reduction product, many countries are just going to run with it. I don't know what my country is going to do, so that means in 2024, depending on what happens with COP10, we're going to have to reevaluate everything. We're going to have to, stand up. We're going to have to, challenge this. Is Canada going to follow our constitution, or is Canada going to follow the WHO? That's the truth, because the harm reduction is protected in our constitution. Same section, too, 7. Just thought I'd bring that up.
Okay, you make a good point there. Now, I'm going to play devil's advocate a little bit.
Go for it.
When I was in the new nicotine lights in the UK, sometimes we speak to vape shops, and it's very difficult to get them active. They just want to sell vapes, and they want to, it's difficult to get them engaged in the advocacy or in the political situation.
I didn't say to get them engaged. I said, can we put a flyer You're writing
Yeah.
out an email. Can you put a line at the bottom?
Yeah,
That's
but
not
that's
getting
exactly
engaged.
what I'm asking. So how do you tell them? How do you get them to understand that this is the importance? And exactly like you said, their businesses depend on the fact that they're informing consumers of the threats that might be coming down the line.
I can't convince someone what to do with their business if they can't see it themselves. I can make sure that, I can't. I just can't. I just think it's common sense.
The problem is sometimes people don't get it because what we're into is really complex. There's a lot of information around. You have to know a bunch of stuff in order to say, and that goes to something this requires one order of magnitude more information to actually contradict something that is false. So when we are actually talking about something, we spend a lot of time to be able to review that and to explain to people why something that they saw on the media that is only a headline, a 5-word headline, is completely false. We actually have to go through 5, 6 studies and explain them to be able to actually make our point. So the problem is that sometimes we don't get the message as simpler as it needed to be.
Well, maybe we need to create a think tank amongst advocacy organizations around the world and simplify those messages.
Communication is a really
Yeah.
desperately need that anybody, pretty much on the whole spectrum of harm reduction
Yeah.
that we need.
I know the World Vaping Association tried to do that. The Le Monde article then just messed everything up. But I need to be able to say, hey, Kurt, what do you think? How would you communicate this? You share.
Anytime.
Yeah, but that's the thing is that sometimes we forget we have other people. I was telling Tomas in the car, I was like, I have all these ideas, but I don't understand your constitution. So my ideas work for my constitution. I'm just floored.
Yes. Well, now I don't understand my constitution either. The thing is that I believe people must understand that vaping is a community-driven phenomenon. That's how we learn how to vape. That's how I learned what was vaping. I started learning and understanding vaping in Facebook groups and in e-cigarette forum.
Mm-hmm.
And people should understand that this is not an industry plot as the tobacco control has tried to make it look. And also, vapers must understand that each time they take 5 minutes to explain to someone that believes that vaping is bad, just 5 minutes, and explain them that society is being lied to by our authorities, this will start making a change, because I am sure that nowadays vapers are helping more people to quit smoking. Vape shops are helping more people to quit smoking than the public services. And at the end, as Roberto Sussman has said, it is consumption, it is consumers, the ones that are going to have the final word. And maybe that's the reason why the WHO and the Secretariat of the SETC are excluding us. They are afraid because we have science on our side. We have the passion on our side because we managed to quit smoking. We know the product. We know it works. And it's something is going to take some time. But in regards of what happens with this COP and looking to the next one, what we need is to stop the discrimination we are being subjected to. And we need to find a way to be listened by these self-proclaimed dictators of health, because I don't know at what point they decided that the liberties and the rights that the right of health grants to people were not important, and they need to start understanding that, as the WHO has said, that the only way to obtain the highest standard of health attainable, it is only achievable if people take care of themselves. And that's what vapers have done. We have care of ourselves. We have decided to quit smoking. We have decided to use safer nicotine products. And I mean, we are 85 million people doing this now. It's just a matter of time, and we know that with that, eventually we will end the smoking, not them.
Kurt, I'd just like to introduce something about advocates. I mean, we have a very strong presence on social media. Advocacy is very strong there. Not so much reaching out into the real world, but I do sense with some of them that they feel that we're saying the same things over and over again and not getting anywhere. But it's important, isn't it, to carry on saying these messages and not get fatigued by it. You feel sometimes like it's a long grind, but it's important to keep making those same messages, isn't it? Even if it feels boring at the time.
Without a doubt. I mean, we're not the only ones that are guilty about repeating the same messages over and over again. I mean, our messages have slightly changed over the years, and unlike some of commentators out there still stuck on popcorn lung, I think the message does have to come out. And I agree 100% what Tomas is saying here, is that this particular phenomenon has grown organically purely based on two criteria. One, a need or a deep sense of wanting to escape harm. And the other one is just convenience. And the convenience factor came in with the disposables and with the pod systems. But the bottom line is that if we look at statistics, and no matter where you go around the world, is that at least 60 to 70% of long-term smokers or people that smoke have a desire to quit. And unfortunately, a lot of the stuff that we've had with us over the last decades have not been too successful. And I think the reason why this movement became so strong and powerful is because I'm of the strong belief, and I don't know about other countries in the world, but particularly in South Africa, that there was just this complete and utter neglect. We've got a solution, you quit or die, or you take a patch, get a patch prescribed, or take some gum, or take a lozenge, and there we go, we're done with you. You know, you've got all the information, and that was as far as it goes. And now that's where the vape shops are now become so critical, is they become part of the support mechanism. And they guide they guide many people wanting to switch through the process, making sure they have the correct device and so forth. My approach to the whole thing was coming from the commercial vape side for a very short period of time, and then moving into full-time consumer advocacy, is that everybody plays a role. So currently I have just under 200 vape shops, independent vape shops on my list, on my database. So whenever something is moving or shaking in our space, whether it be from a policy or legislation point of view, or even from a very interesting piece of study, I either break it down for them in a way that I can, piecemeal, explain it to them, and distribute it across these networks, so then it empowers them to do the same thing. And then I also act as a sounding board for whenever there is a situation around, have you heard about this study and so forth. And again, it goes back to what Maria's saying, a network of people sharing and so forth. And that's how this entire movement of harm reduction has grown. It's because it's community-based. It's not pushed top-down. It's just spread like, I'd hate to say a disease, but like it's spread like something good, you know, like a flavorful cloud over an environment where people actually share, and that's where it's become so strong and powerful. And don't let anybody baffle you or pull the wool over your eyes. Pretty much all of the innovation that we've seen in this industry has been driven by consumers.
And this is
everything has been driven by the
really
consumers.
Interesting that harm reduction products touch on a population that the traditional tobacco control cannot reach and have not reached ever. That is, people not wanting to quit. those accidental quitters that we have a bunch.
That's a
know.
convenience factor there. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Me too. Well, I mean, I wanted to quit, but I didn't think I could ever quit, and then I accidentally quit. And you know, I want to tell everybody right now. I'm just going to share this because I made a commitment for 2024.
Right.
What are you doing? Okay.
I'm eager to hear what this commitment is.
So I made a commitment that through the 2024, I don't care what people say about me that are not on my side. So I am going to share how I feel. I have no filter, and I am just going out there. And if I see something that you're doing that is ridiculous, I'm going to call you out on it. If I want, and I'm also going to, oops, someone's calling me. I'm also going to treat people the way I want to be treated. So I don't mind if people call me by nicknames. So I've given nicknames to all tobacco control people in Canada. I have nice little nicknames, shorten their names, added a Y. And I'm going to engage with them as if they're my friend. Because at the end of the day, for someone to hate me this much, they must have liked me at some point. You can't have hate without love. It just makes no sense. So I invited them here. I send them invitations every time I'm in their hometown because I have a dossier on all of them. I ask them to go out for a coffee. I treat them as my friends. What they do after doesn't matter because at the end of the day, I truly believe we're all on the same side. Our goal is the same. But I think people in the HR side, people that are on this table, people that have been on this community, in this thing, don't care how it happens. We don't judge if someone quits smoking cold turkey. We don't judge if someone uses the gum or uses Zyban. Kudos, I don't know if everybody knows, Zyban, the drug that you take. Kudos to someone who has quit smoking. We celebrate them all. That's what they don't do.
Maria, that's one of the pillars of harm reduction.
Exactly.
It's the pillar of harm reduction is that you do not judge.
Exactly.
And now we have to wonder why they are fighting and debating to ensure that harm reduction is removed from FCTC. And that is the scariest thing because harm reduction is about the person, not the institution. And the fact is they want to remove the person from addiction. And anyone who has been in any form of recovery understands that this gets me so upset. Just so people know, I am in recovery. It's been like a long time, but it's still a day away. What I'm trying to say is that what they are doing is taking the person out of the addiction. And anything that anyone has learned in addiction studies or through their personal addiction is you can only quit for yourself. And they're trying to take me out of my quitting. They're trying to take the me, and that is wrong, and that is when things happen and go wrong and people return to their addiction, regardless of what it is. So I think this is why this is so personal to me.
I like that commitment to communicate and to engage with people, because this is what I try and say to consumers all the time is to get yourself out there and make your voice heard, not just on social media. But I like what my colleague Lindsay Stroud, she mentioned it earlier, she says it quite a lot, is that thing from Shawshank Redemption with Andy Dufresne where he was writing letters, and then once he got partially what he wanted, then he said, I'm going to write 2 letters every week now. And it's that sort of, I'm going to make myself known. I mean, a lot of consumers have been very active around COP10. It's been thrilling for me to see so many consumers understanding the issues and getting involved all over the world. But when COP10's gone, that shouldn't stop. They should still be writing to their politicians, still be writing saying, protect my interests, and just making yourself known and keep in their heads all the time and say that we're still here. So, I mean, do you guys agree this is what we should be doing? Just when COP10's finished, don't stop the pressure. Carry on writing to your elected representatives regularly if possible, once a month or whatever. If you see something that displeases you, write to them and say you're not happy. Is that the right approach, do you think?
Everything.
Yep. And I would add that provision of harm reduction alternatives is essentially wrong. It is an unjustified limitation of our freedom and our ability to make decisions. And I would also, I've been thinking about this on ways of having the non-vaping, non-smoking part of the society that are not really interested in what is happening, to understand that eventually these people will come and will try to take something they like. I mean, it is just a matter of time. This movement of health technocracies that have decided that they can impose whatever decision they consider or they deem appropriate without any or with this total disregard of our ability to make our own choices in relation to our health and our tastes and what we like, it is essentially wrong. And people that don't vape, that don't smoke, must understand that in no time they will come and take from them as something they like. It might be maybe with alcohol, desserts, sugar, whatever. And I am not against of having a healthy way of life, but it's something you choose. It's something you want, and it's something you pursue. It is not something mandatory that you have to compel to what these people are dictating to us.
That's the saying of health is a right, not an obligation.
Exactly, and health is a right, and it grants freedoms and rights to the people. And the governments have one of their three obligations is to respect, and they are not doing this with vapors.
Like tobacco control has the word control in their name, and I can't help but notice that they own that. Like they find all these ways to control. Like, I mean, it's like, I don't know, do they all have it tattooed in a secret part of their body? Like, I just picture that. Based on what Lindsay said.
I think their toys were taken away from them at a young age, because you've got climate control and you've got tobacco control and you've got population control and you've got, it's just control. I think it's because we didn't give them enough toys. And now because we have toys, they don't want us to have toys.
I think patience and persistence is what kind of helped me out in the beginning of my advocating. I was patient and I was persistent. So I tell this story so many times, but I love it. I emailed Health Canada, which is, now I've realized I have to say Canada's FDA. Canada's FDA. And I emailed them on January 3rd of 2019. And I said, I would like a meeting with you guys anytime between now and December 31st. And I would follow up every couple of weeks. And it's all about following up. And they did give me a meeting, and I met. But how can someone say no? And you know what? There was a senator that did say no. She was the senator that brought forth our bill. But I forced them to tell me that she didn't want to meet with me. And she didn't want to discuss vaping. Because every time they told me she's not available, I gave them another 3 months and another 3 months. And I gave them more flexibility. And I didn't, because they refused to say no on having a meeting, I went back and forth. So it's okay to push back until you get that no and why. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? We can be worried about things that are happening, but if you don't make yourself known, if you don't let your elected representatives or whoever's in charge of policy in your country, if you don't let them know that you're there and that you have a problem, they won't know the problem exists and they won't know that people have that problem. So it's important, isn't it, for consumers to just make their voices known as regularly as they can. And like I said, now we've been very active up to COP10. After COP10, it doesn't stop. We have to carry on.
Right, if your country was at COP, write to your elected officials about the secrecy. And do not worry about grammar. Do not worry about periods and commas and using big fancy words. Just write to them. Write to them until you get a response. Ask them how they feel about these secretive meetings. Does this align with your values as a X? Just keep writing to them. And I don't want to hear an excuse, oh, I can't write emails. Yes, you can. Just put a couple sentences together. There's also something called ChatGPT. Throw it in there if you want to be fancy. But all they need to do is hear from you. And don't worry about if it's right or wrong. It's your story. It's your feelings. Do you want to live in a country where your government supports secrecy? That's, to me, the biggest thing.
Jeffrey, Latin Americans are very passionate. I think they're one of the most engaged on this subject. And there seems to be a bit of movement in South America at the moment with some governments, Chile recently, for example. What's the outlook for South America? What would you urge your South American and Latin American counterparts to do as consumers in the next year?
Well, in Latin America, as we know, Chile is actually already voted on the law, on the bill that actually is regulating vaping. They're waiting for the guidelines from the medical institution or the institution in charge of healthcare about how it's going to be commercialized and stuff. We're waiting on that. Peru is discussing regulation. Colombia is discussing regulation as well. And there's a lot of movement. And the good thing about people in Latin America is that they do get involved. They do push back. And we're really glad for it because, you can see, for example, myself or Tomas or a bunch of other people around, but actually there's a lot of people behind. There's a lot of people behind that actually are pushing for this harm reduction products to be regulated and properly regulated on the continuum of risk. Right? So we do get backed by people. There's a lot of people that are wanting for these harm reduction products to be available. Obviously, like in other areas, we have a lot of countries that have banned these products, unfortunately. For example, Brazil, for example, Mexico, Panama, for example, that we are here right now. So we're trying. We cannot do everything, of course, right? But we're definitely trying. And like I said, there's a lot of community that got really involved with this. So thank God.
Yeah, we just had a consultation, I think it finished yesterday in Brazil.
In Brazil, yeah.
And there are interesting signs from the new government in Argentina. So this is the time to be a Latin American consumer advocate, isn't it? Get out there and make your voices heard. Let's see more of this.
I believe that when you become an advocate for harm reduction, you become a global advocate. Because you start pushing for everybody. You start, cheering for what happens in New Zealand. You start cheering for what happens in the UK. You start cheering for what happens in Sweden. And you get a little bit sad when, something bad happens to one of the countries. For example, what is happening to people in Australia, for example. We get sad and frustrated because, and we have seen this, and I'm pretty sure that with some other harm reduction movements, like what happened with HIV and illicit drugs and cannabis and cocaine and all that stuff, right? You can see that we cheer like a global community, right? And I believe that's the whole idea that we have as justice for all, harm reduction for everyone, empathy and love. That is pretty much the base, solid ground of harm reduction.
I mean, but just some of the consumers that are here, we'd never met each other if we weren't into the same campaign kind of thing. I've never met Kurt in person before. And Kurt, you said you met some of your heroes here, didn't you?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I've worked on a couple of international projects. I mean, Jeffrey and myself worked on a number of them. And then we had individuals that from the World Vapors Alliance, I happen to be affiliated with them. And that's been 3 years and never actually meeting in person. But the harm reduction movement has brought us together, and it's just part of being in this new world of ours, this connected but apart world. And I think the reason why I'm so grateful for being invited and being able to attend here is that you do get to then have discussions with some of the people that you've been following for so long. And I mean, I told Professor Roberto Sussman, I can't tell you how many times I've cited you. And the same applies to Dr. Fossolinos and Dr. Peloso. I can't tell you how many times I've cited you or used your research to drive a point across, whether it be in a tweet war, or whether it be on whether it be actual a consultation document that I've submitted to our Department of Health or to our Treasury. now you actually get that opportunity to share and speak to them, but also to strengthen those bonds. And we've already have these discussions. How can we make or do this better? How can we connect or create stronger forums? How do we share? And I think those are the things that we will be spearing or heading into 2024 and beyond. And again, part of that innovation, community-driven innovation, because the need is still so great, and that's why I think these conferences are so important. And that would be the true power of an FCTC by bringing everybody on board that are aligned to a common goal. And that's the biggest disappointment I have with the FCTC. It should never be about control. It should be about support. And if the original goal was to reduce non-communicable diseases as a result of smoking, and that was the goal, and always been the goal, and include everybody in there to achieve that goal, I think we wouldn't be struggling around with articles that were brought up years ago, and we're still trying to deliberate this and so forth and so on, because the goal is now shift. The posts are moved, different games, different players. No one's aligned to the original understanding, and that was non-communicable diseases reduction due to smoking.
I think, sorry, I wanted to share something just as an advocate. One of the things very early on, I am lucky. I live in David Sweener's hometown. So I have this incredible relationship with David Sweener from this day one that I started advocating. He's always supported everything, showed up at my protests and stuff like that. And I think that gave me the confidence, but I didn't need that confidence because anyone you reach out to any expert in this area, they will come back and say, yes, when do you need me? Like if I needed someone to write something on my website to give me things, David put something up for our website. I needed Dr. F to show up during my education. I emailed him, yeah, when do you need me? And I want to be that for other people. I personally want to be that for other people, be approachable to the knowledge sharing. And that's what happens in this group. And we didn't even have to meet each other, but we would know. Would want you to know, Kurt, if you messaged me, and as long as the message got through to me, I'd figure out how to help you. Because that's kind of what we do in this part of the life.
I think it's pretty obvious if you look at some of the Twitter threads that come out. Someone pokes somebody, and then 6 or 7 of us jump in there and have us share. And then 6 and 7 of our friends jump in there and have us share. And I think we're starting to see, in fact, there's a competition at the moment, I believe, that how many people can get blocked as fast as possible.
I just get blocked pretty quickly.
The best thing that that we have over there is in the harm reduction movement, because we already have a bunch of information, bunch of science, blah 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 blah. But the best thing that we have is the community at the end. And even though that we are on such a toxic environment, because we are on a toxic environment, and not about the community, but what is surrounding when it comes to several people and entities and institutions that are trying to cancel us and try to avoid hearing us, we'll still manage some way to have a positive attitude. And I think that goes into perspective.
It does, and I don't think anyone else could understand, other than people who are out there in the forefront, what it's like to be attacked by media.
Yeah.
I got, there was this huge thing that the CBC did on me, and I had so much, again, I'm here to be honest, so I had so much anxiety. My mental health was they were asking me really dumb questions. I had to answer questions they're like, why are your graphics so fancy? And I was like, I pay $14.99 a month for Canva. And, they're questioning me on how I know Dr. John Oyston, because he takes money from tobacco. But, he's my neighbor. So I went through this, and I knew they weren't going to be honest or reveal. I knew the truth would have been edited out because it didn't fit their narrative. and me having to call the mental health support line, because I was just dealing with all this and trying to explain to them that the CBC was after me.
Oh, yeah, we know that. We get paid.
You know, or that the Bloomberg media, like, you know, this and that. But I was able to reach out to someone who advocates that could totally understand what I'm going through and could be like, and help me reason into, yeah, you know what, it's going to happen, figure out how to deal with it and stuff like that. But I'm just saying, those are the other things that people don't understand, is that I rely on other advocates in this industry to be able to help me get through those moments so I can do that next interview.
I think this is what I'd like to get across to consumers. I always mention that when they are attacking us and the only thing they're trying to do is smear us, it means they haven't got any arguments left.
Yeah.
You know, so just take comfort from that and get confidence from that. I mean, just before the November iteration of COP10, of course, before it was rescheduled, Corporate Accountability, which is, I think, partially funded by Bloomberg, held a webinar, and they were criticising all groups, including ours, for the activities we were planning to try and get our voice heard at COP. And I'll never forget, one of them said about the TPA, they said they've even booked an entire hotel. And I'm thinking, well, what are you living in the 1970s or something? It's not difficult to book a hotel room these days on the internet. And do you not have a computer at home? Do you not book things regularly yourself? Do you still use travel agents? I mean, you know, this is the thing. This is the kind of things that they have thrown at us. But why are they throwing at us? Why are they not countering our arguments? They're not. They're just coming out with smears. And like I said, the first GATC bulletin that came out this week, 90% of it was talking about tobacco interference, and it was attempting to say that people like you, people like us sitting here, we are industry, and we're not industry. We have never. They constantly have said, like the woman from the Department of Health of the Netherlands came out and said the tobacco industry invented e-cigarettes to try and attract children because their markets are running. No, they didn't. Consumers, Hondick invented it. Consumers took them back in the sheds and they built them themselves and made them useful for. And then the small independent businesses came up. Many of them were consumers themselves. That's how it started up. It was only when the whole thing was up and running in about 2012 that the first transaction came about where the tobacco industry bought a company, L'Oreal buying Blue in America. So we're not industry, but when they're throwing those arguments around and trying to smear you, they haven't got anything left.
They don't have arguments. They don't debate. They only attack because
Tobacco control.
They are being paid to do that. They cannot. Yes. Their hearts sometimes, I guess, are so bitter with hatred because. Oh, come on! What happened in that tweet against Joseph Maguero from Africa? That was stigmatizing. That was
disgusting.
They
a disgusting
cancer.
attack. And I mean, I'm sure because they are mercenaries of these entities and of Bloomberg, whatever. They cannot understand that people like myself are happily paying with my own resources these kind of trips. So I do pay them, and that's something because I'm convinced that if I manage to quit smoking and that I have been cigarette-free for 7 years and something, I'm convinced there are others that will be able to do it. But these people are so industry-centered, like saying this is a devil because they need a devil to justify all their abuses and justify their prohibitions and justify their lies. So they want to equiparate us or to equate us, with the industry because that's the only way they can try to shut us up. But they haven't been able to.
When I was running my business up until 2021, I was traveling all over the world, talking at panels and went to political conferences, Labour, Lib Dems, Conservatives in the UK, and I travelled all over. I was spending tens of thousands of pounds of my own money going around and doing this, and yet over 2.5 kilometres away, however far the convention centre is, no one there isn't paid a hefty salary for doing what they're doing. If you said to them, you've got to go to Panama and you'll just get expenses and you're going to do that, they wouldn't do it.
No.
they're all being employed in highly paid jobs to do what they're doing. And they've got the gall to scratch around and say, oh, we found out this advocate got some expenses from someone to go to a conference, so therefore their tobacco industry. The absolute hypocrisy of these people is stunning. And you've got to think, all of these people we talk to on social media, they're all advocating in their spare time.
No, we're all bots.
Yeah.
We're not real.
They're all advocating their spare time. There were, when I was running my business, I wasn't being paid anything, and I was spending my own money. There are thousands of people like that all over the world who are passionate about vaping because it changed their life, and they're doing this all in their spare time and with their own money.
When my mindset changed around this whole thing is that, and I'm going to be a bit controversial here and apologize if anybody's offended, but I mean, it needs to be said, is that when this approach, or when this started around, you must be industry funded, or you're just an industry shrill, or something like that. There are two things in history that I've picked up. The one was the Nuremberg Law that the Nazis applied, and the other one is what they called the South African pencil test. And back in the apartheid days, what the apartheid police used to do was shove a pencil in a person's hair, and if the pencil stayed in their hair, they were classified as black and therefore were ostracized and stigmatized and put in a particular area. If the pencil fell out of their hair, then they're considered as white and therefore moved into a different area. And
What would happen if they did the pencil test on you, Kat?
Sorry?
What would happen if they did the pencil test on you?
Well, the thing is that it's quite obvious that I'm white. This particularly pertained around coloured individuals, because there's a particular group of individuals in South Africa that are coloured, and some of them are darker in complexion than others. And that was the rudimentary test. Is a pencil in the hair. If it fell out, you have to be white. If it stuck, you were black.
I would be black.
And it's just rather disgusting. But then I realized that this is the caliber of people we're dealing with. Is that the level, they don't want to measure you on your merit and the value. They just want to find a way of then discrediting you and diminish your value by a simple one test. Yeah. And when you come to the conclusion that they actually don't want to engage with you, they don't want to understand where you're coming from, they don't want to hear from you, when they immediately approach the conversation with that question, or with that statement, or with even that intent. The argument is you're just going to waste your time.
Yeah.
I don't think money, it's 2024. We can all make more money in this world. We can't make more time. Let's be honest. That's the truth. And I find that to be the weakest thing. And I try super hard not to say they're Bloomberg funded or they're speaking because of Bloomberg. They may be Bloomberg funded, but at the end of the day, they are accountable for the words that they say. And they need to be held accountable personally for the words that they say. And no amount of money will force them to say things that they don't believe. And I don't know, no one can tell me what to. You can try. I will take your money, but I'm still going to say what is true to me, because that's who I am, and I believe. And if I think that about myself, I want to believe that about them. And all these mean things, like that woman wishing cancer upon someone who vapes.
Joseph, yeah.
I don't believe it was the Bloomberg money that did that. It was she believing that it was funny and truthful and ironic.
Or alternatively, she's looking for clout.
Well, I mean, she got a lot of retweets. All you need to do is mess with a vaping advocate on Twitter, and then all of a sudden your Twitter profile goes like this. I mean, that's the worst thing that we do. We amplify these people.
Yeah. Okay, look, we're running short on time now. Should we finish off on a bit of positive note?
I thought that was
what have consumers who advocate, what have we got to look forward to? What positives are there in the next year? Go on, put on your rose-tinted glasses and talk about the positives in the next year.
Less people smoking.
Yeah. Better information. I mean, that's what ProVapeo was created. And we have lots of information to share, and I know people will start learning about vaping and learning that this is a very good alternative to quit smoking, and they will start questioning the government. The prohibition eventually will fall by, but what will fall by itself.
I'm actually looking forward to these nicotine pouches. That's another choice. More choices for people who use nicotine. Can you imagine, like, 10 years ago, to have more than, like, just, like, it's more choice. Imagine where the innovation's going to go in a couple of years.
The thing is that tobacco harm reduction empowers a person.
Yeah.
So we get to choose.
I can't wait to see what people who smoke and people who vape are going to come up with next, because they're the innovators, not big tobacco, not big pharma. Yeah.
I think we're going to see less people smoke, but I need to understand that we're dealing with people with very thin skins, and eventually that reality is going to catch up. And I don't know about you guys, but I'm seeing a slight softening of tone, and I'm seeing a slight elevation of, hang on, there might be some truth in it. I was reading a couple of articles this morning, and there's definitely a slight softening of tone, and we're starting to see this needle shift a bit, because now we're seeing things as that there might be less harmful. There might be
I've
more
kind of noticed. I
effective.
think there's a resignation amongst some of them that
Yes.
the genie's out the bottle. They're
Yes.
not going to win this battle.
No.
They can fight, but sometime they've got to back down and do something practical.
I think
So-
they need to pivot to smoking marijuana,
Yeah.
because you're combusting that.
So Jeffrey, you were
Pivot.
quite quiet on this. Just you have the last word. What is there positive to come? What can we be optimistic about in 2024 and beyond?
Well, we're gonna have a lot more information. Like Clive have made it clear on the list that he shares. Like every single week, like 50 studies come out. So there's a bunch of information, a lot of good studies coming out. We're gonna have a lot of changes probably, regulatory speaking. I do think that something's good gonna come out of this COP, to be honest. We have seen many countries stand up for harm reduction one way or the other. And to be honest, we don't know not even 5% of what is going on inside. As it's so secretive, and pretty much everyone is canceled if they're not following their agenda. So I think that something good is going to come out. I do think that there's going to be some positive changes along the way. I do think that, for example, Sweden is going to get smoke-free within a year, probably. New Zealand is getting pretty close. They already announced the day before yesterday that it's already at 6.8. UK, they're going to find out probably. Well, I'm pretty sure that they're going to change their mind somewhere with what is happening. But we're going to see a lot of innovation, like Kurt was saying. We're going to see right now that is unavoidable.
Well, that's a great note to end on. So thanks, guys. Thanks, Kurt, Thomas, Jeffrey, and Maria. So we'll be back in about 8 minutes or so for the closing of this conference. Hopefully, it'll be a fun and informal session. So we look forward to back in about 10 minutes maybe. So thanks very much for all the panelists, and we'll see you soon.
Testing, testing. Yep.
We got through it. Oh, wow, that's really loud.
Shall I put some water over there? Should I put some water on that table?
Yeah, I'll go get, yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Where'd Martin go?
He's getting some water. It's going to be the lights that are going to get to me at this point now. They're way worse when you're higher.
Conference of the People, Good Cop. I want to thank a lot of people before we get started with the closing session. Want to thank our sponsors, the National Taxpayers Union. Want to thank the Tholos Foundation, a part of Americans for Tax Reform. Without them, we wouldn't be here. We couldn't put on this conference. So thank you to their financial and logistical support for this. Want to thank Martin Cullop, who is our senior fellow, who has worked tirelessly to put this together, along with Lindsay Stroud, our senior fellow on harm reduction. They've been working months to put this together, actually a few more months than they thought they were going to work, because the first meeting was canceled in November. I want to thank the TPA staff for all of their hard work here in Panama and back in D.C. It's well, almost happy hour anywhere, here or D.C., so I hope this D.C. staff is still working. No, they are. So let's thank the hotel, the Central Hotel of Panama. They have been amazing hosts. I mean, the food, the room, everything. The AV team, thank you for putting together a wonderful conference for us with all the technical abilities. But let's take this back to the beginning as to why we're here. We talked a lot this week about consumers, about science, about policy, about taxation. But I want to take it back to really why we're here. It's about people. It's about people trying to quit smoking. It's about the World Health Organization that is not promoting the right science or any science at this point. Now, when I first kicked off this conference, I talked about my father. And when I was a child in the car, he would smoke, he would chain smoke, and the car was filled with cigarette smoke. I'm going to fast forward a few years to 1984. I was a senior in high school, and I was finishing up finals. Okay, everyone's doing the math with 1984 and senior in high school, aren't they? Yeah, yeah, I'm old. So I'm a senior in high school, and I'm finishing up finals, and my father had just gone through a triple bypass. And this was because of his addiction to cigarettes. He smoked 3.5 packs of cigarettes a day for 20-plus years. That was 1984. He had his triple bypass. He passed away in 1999, 15 years later. I was 31 years old, or 33 years old. And I think that's when I became an advocate of harm reduction. I didn't know it, but that's when I became an advocate. I started the Taxpayers Protection Alliance in 2011. I had been at another organization for 18 years. I've been doing this a very, very long time. And this is one of the first issues that our organization took up, because of the importance it was to me as a person, but also to the policy world, and also the World Health Organization receiving a lot of taxpayer money. And since then, we've expanded our staff to include Lindsay, to include Martin, and Skip Murray, who's back in the States, who's been tweeting incredibly. I mean, her threads are so long and so helpful. So, a round of applause for Skip, because she's done a great job. And before we talk to Martin about his story, before we talk to Lindsay about her story, I just have to tell you that I've seen a lot of your names on Twitter. I follow you on Twitter, I retweet, I reply, but to meet you in person has been amazing. And this is the first time that I've been able to meet a lot of you, and it just gives me so much more energy and so much more strength to continue on with this issue. I've talked to doctors, I've talked to consumers, to people who are vaping, and people whose lives have been affected. And it's really good to shake someone's hand. Instead of retweeting someone, but to actually shake their hand. And I've been thinking this week, where do we go from here? And I was asked, I think it was, I forget who asked, was it Chris? Did you ask me what we do after this? What our measure of success? Oh, it was, thank you, Ricardo, yes. And the first measure of success was putting this conference together. Trying to put a conference together in another country is not easy. The next measure of success is our next conference, because there will be a second good cop, wherever that may be, whether it's Africa, the Middle East, who knows. So the measure of success is that you're here, and that we had these panels, and that we're talking as a community, and we're meeting each other as a community. And I heard Kurt on the last panel, Kurt, where are you? Oh, over there, saying that you had never met a lot of these people. And it really makes me feel good that I was able to provide that for people so you can interact. But Martin, why don't you tell us your story about tobacco harm reduction? You've told it to RegWatch, but I want you to tell, and then Lindsay, tell your story, please.
I don't need that, do I?
No.
I suppose many people here have heard my story many times, but me and Chris, years ago, started writing about, we both developed a passionate distaste for the nanny state a long time ago. So I was writing articles about nanny state. And I remember, e-cigarettes were just coming in. I remember someone offered me one in a pub in 2007. And so I was interested in what these things were, mostly because I found it in 2010 that the government in the UK wanted to ban them. And I didn't know anything about them, so I got on forums and spoke to people and said, look, I write this anti-nanny state blog, and I've heard that the government wants to ban these products you enjoy, so because they want to do that, I want to be on your side. So they told me all about them. People sent me little bits of kit, and I started using it just so I understood what I was writing about. And then over time, I found I was using it more and more. And I was a dual user for a long time. Some people just try a vape, throw a packet in the bin, and never smoke again. I loved tobacco. My sister once said to me, she said, when I had quit using vapes, she said that I thought if everyone in the world had stopped vaping, you would be the last one still going. I love tobacco that much. But so over a period of time, I was dual using, and then one day I just turned to my wife and said, "Can you remember last time that I smoked?" And she said, "I think it was about 4 or 5 weeks ago." I'm one of those accidental quitters. I literally forgot to smoke. And now, okay, I'm at the position, I go out with people who are smokers, and they'll say, "Do you want a cigarette? We'll go outside." "Yeah, I'll come with you." And I get halfway through the cigarette, and I think, this is rubbish. It's not that I hate cigarettes or anything. Some people do, and some people had a lot of effort to try and quit. I never made a single quit attempt in all my life. I just drifted into it. And now I prefer vaping to smoking. It's just simple as that. And so when I do go out for a cigarette, I know I'm not relapsing to smoking because it's just not as much fun as vaping. So that's kind of my story. And so here we are now. And I've been talking about this sort of thing now for 15, 16 years. And I enjoy talking about it. Like I said, I did this in my spare time when I ran a transport company and spent tens of thousands of pounds of my own money. And there are lots of vaping advocates all over the world who do the same thing. I've sold my business, I've sold my assets, so I'm comfortable for money. I don't have to worry too much about money, but I'm still passionate about the subject, and I still really want to get it over. So people like the WHO and all the Bloomberg advocates and all those people that just, come on, guys, pack it in. Just let this miracle happen and just sit back and you want to get rid of death and disease from smoking, well, just let vaping products and snus and nicotine pouches and all the other things, just make them available and it will happen on its own. And it won't cost you anything to do it because people buy these things with their own money. And that's what I advocate for and why I believe in the subject. Is that enough?
Absolutely. Lindsay?
Yes, so I got involved with vaping back in 2016 at a different think tank that has long worked on tobacco policy and tobacco harm reduction policy. And I was a person who smoked, so they were like, oh, you can work on our vaping policy, and I knew nothing about it whatsoever. That was the good old days of vape shops in the States, where pretty much every strip mall had a vape shop at it. So found out about this amazing community of entrepreneurs turned advocates that you were just selling their e-liquid in their shops, helping adults quit smoking because it was a journey that they were able to get on, and so they wanted to share it with everybody else. But unfortunately, lawmakers don't understand that. And so, I mean, back in 2016, and at least in the States, it's been a lesson in government when you're looking at the way vaping has been regulated. These people have dealt with state, local, federal lawmakers at the legislative side. They've also had to go deal with the courts, federal regulators. It's so much bureaucracy and only a little bit of elected officials and not very astute elected officials. There's still a lot of massive misinformation, and you see it when you're watching legislative hearings, and they have no idea about the products that they are, trying to regulate and/or ban. So I started doing research. I worked with Dr. Radu, wrote a book on it, started, working on fighting the state bills, started doing analysis, looking at, what the states were doing and taxes, and then EVALI came along, or the vaping lung injuries, and I started following every Sunday. I'd go through all the state health department pages because they were being more transparent about what were the products, who were the people being impacted with lung injuries caused by vaping, was it THC or nicotine? So that kind of created this whole 50-state analysis that I'm now pretty much known for, where I do the numbers every year. And I'd love to do it globally, but some countries are not very transparent with their information on that. So I accidentally quit smoking myself in November of 2022. I had been dual using, and I gradually went down from a pack of cigarettes a day to one in the whole entire day, and I realized I was just like, I don't need this anymore. So, and now I can go and smoke, and it just doesn't taste good. I can't smoke half a cigarette anymore. I can do like one hit, and I'm just like, no, this is not good. And I think that shows the importance of flavors, actually, that, flavors reinforce that this stuff tastes nasty because the flavors do taste so good, and you're still getting the nicotine. So, and now I'm here doing stuff with you guys,
Fantastic. Thank you, Lindsay. Well, we're going to do something now. We're going to bring some folks up to tell their story about why they quit, how they quit, and the products that they use. Martin, I know you have some names.
I wish I had one of those big wheels to sort of spin it round, see who's next,
It's not in the budget.
Let's start, Juan Jose, you said you come and do you want to come and give your story first?
Now, this is a gentleman who posted a picture as he entered the airport, and you can find it online.
15 years ago, I tried all the possible methods to stop smoking, gums, patches, everything. But I couldn't stop smoking until 2013, when I started to feel some pain in my rib cage. So I was worried, and I went to have an X-ray to see what was happening with my lungs. I thought something bad had happened, and the doctor said, "Oh, you smoke a lot." Yes, 2 packs a day. Oh, you have to quit. Okay, but what do I have? Nothing, but still you have to quit. So I thought it was time to quit smoking. So at that time, my mother was living in the United States, in McAllen, Texas. So I ordered from Halo some liquids and one vapor. I got to the U.S. 2013, 25th of December, I remember very well, and the package was already at my mother's house. I tried the first time a vape, and then I said, oh, this is all like nice. And that day, I smoked 4 or 5 more cigarettes. And the next day, I thought that I was going to leave the pack of cigarettes at my mother's home and go to the mall just with the vapor. I've never smoked again. I quit from one day to the other, magically, with this vapor. When I returned to Mexico, I was looking for more e-liquids and found out that vaping was prohibited. So one of my friends told me to order some e-liquids from China, because from the United States, they were not sending the e-liquids to Mexico because they were banned. So I ordered some e-liquids from China and got caught in the mail by the government saying that the importation was prohibited. So I was very mad. It was a package of maybe $52 or $53. So, as you know, I'm a lawyer, and I was very mad and said, I'm going to sue the mail department, so at least they will spend more money than my package that they are stealing from me. So in 2014, I won this injunction, so a judge ordered the mail to give me back my package. So I thought, it is too easy to win these kind of trials in Mexico, and I started this NGO called México y el Mundo Vapeando, where we are always trying to go on trial against all the prohibitions in Mexico. That's my story. Thank you. Thank you.
Never make a lawyer mad. That's the, that was the message I got.
So spin the wheel again. Go on, Jeffrey, come and tell us your story.
Come on down, or up.
Come on down.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. Thank you very much, guys, for bringing us here and having this conference. I don't quite remember or accurately remember when I started vaping. I believe that it was around 10 years ago. I was dual using for like a week or so, because I bought an Eagle device that it was really poor on battery. So that was the main problem. Whatsoever, like a week after, I said, oh no, I need a bigger battery. The thing that is keep me is not working for me is that it doesn't last enough. So I bought a Cool Fire, Inokin Cool Fire. It was a great device, and even so that I carried a pack of cigarettes with me in the car for like 3-4 months, and it was just there. I never used it again. So like we were talking about on the last panel, I was on one of those accidental quitters, and that's a population that nobody touches. Nobody reaches. Tobacco control is not able to touch it, is not able to reach it, because it's simply people that do not want to quit smoking. And I was one of them, so I know it works.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, mate. And I'm going to ask Mark Oates next, because he's got a slightly different story, and I always enjoy hearing his story, because it's not particularly to do with vaping, is it, Mark? So.
Martin.
Thank you very much. And while I get the chance, thank you for arranging this conference. I think it really says something to your team that back in November you were ready to go with this conference, and the World Health Organization wasn't. So I'm probably part of a group that, tobacco control don't really talk about, which is I was not what could be described as a sort of, I didn't have an addiction to nicotine. I used nicotine because I found it pleasurable. And I was an irregular smoker. And I was always going to smoke because I enjoyed it. And I was flying home from China where I was working, and I stopped off in Sweden on a layover, and I saw some Swedish snus. I didn't know what it was at the time, but I bought it, tried it, thought this is fantastic. I didn't know anything about it. Got back to the UK and tried to continue using it and found out it was banned. And that set alight my instincts of freedom. And then I found out that instinct of freedom coalesced with another instinct, which was this is actually safer. So I got really annoyed and pissed off that the British government weren't allowing it. And because of that, I was forced to continue to smoke. So the British government, the European Union, were complicit in keeping me harming myself because I couldn't get access to a reduced risk nicotine product. And then it was only when I combined it with vaping, when I couldn't get hold of snus, that I managed to finally sort of stop smoking. But yeah, I've got no interest in stopping to use nicotine. I think it provides pleasure. I think life is all about pleasure, and life would be incredibly boring if one doesn't enjoy oneself. So when they talk about a nicotine-free society, over my dead body.
Great stuff. Thanks, Mark. Thanks. We got two more. We're going to have Kurt, I think, and then Thomas said he'd give us a story.
How are we doing questions?
Hi again. First of all, I'd like to thank TPA and the team. Absolutely fantastic. And everybody else out here for the sharing and talking and you know, lifting the spirit sometimes. I sometimes get emotional about talking about my story because 20-odd years ago, I decided to quit smoking because my father passed away a day or two before our planned wedding. So it was devastating. And it took me 10 years until I found something that worked. And that just happened to be a flavored nicotine vape that I found in the boot of a car in a parking lot that somebody was selling. That's how desperate I was to quit. I would try anything. And to buy a product out of someone's boot in their car in a parking lot gives you an indication of where I was. Within 3 days, I quit smoking, and for 10 years, I have not touched a single cigarette, not a single puff. I haven't even physically held a cigarette. So one of the reasons, apart from my father, was that I come from an enormous smoking family, enormous in more ways than one, numbers and size. And whilst I was doing all of this, I realized that 4 years ago, I'm the fourth oldest person in my father's family. I have one surviving uncle and 2 older cousins. And that's what the devastation of smoking has done to my family. But the number one reason why I do this is for my son and people like me. Because my son never got to meet his grandparents. He never got to meet his uncles. He's never got to meet any of those people. And to me, that takes a big chunk out of somebody's life when you don't have those connections with your older generation. And that's why I do it every day. It's because there's families out there that stand at risk of losing some of the most important relationships in their lives. And that's why I get angry with the World Health Organization and all these anti-vape activists or anti-vape individuals out there, is because they talk about the kids. Which kids are they talking about? Because they're certainly not talking about my son and all the others out there. And if I just basically look at the numbers, 2.4 billion people on this earth are below the age of 18. 1.3 billion of them, of adults, are smokers. What percentage of the kids are these people really talking about when they put these measures in place? What percentage? Because I can tell you it's not all the kids that will be positively affected by the way they're continuing here. So thank you very much, everybody. I really do appreciate it. It's been a fantastic conference, and I'm looking forward to seeing you all again. You guys have been great. Thanks, David. Thanks, Liz.
Thank you. And we do have a bet. We have a dollar bet as to where the next COP is going to be.
I'm going to win it.
Of course.
Just Thomas to go. And then get ready because we have some questions from the online audience for you.
I smoked for 27 years, and in 2016, my wife was in a holiday with my kids in Florida, and I was at the office working, and she called me and said, "Hey, why don't you come for the weekend?" And I say, "Well, maybe," and bring us an empty suitcase. I say, "Oh no, I don't know how many things she has already bought, but I am an obedient husband, and I went to Florida. I carried a big empty suitcase, and I remember in the plane thinking, I need to buy one of those electronic cigarettes, maybe because that will help me not to get out to the street and lose time smoking, because it's I always have found that it disconcentrates you when you are working. But I didn't know anything about vaping. Actually, I was driving in Tampa and I saw a tobacco store, and I said, that's the place where I have to go. I didn't know about vape shops. And I get into the store. They had some Halo products like Juan Jose. I bought one. I came to Mexico, and 2 weeks after that, I didn't want to quit smoking. Let me be clear. 2 weeks or 3 weeks ago, after that, on a Friday, I was going to go to a store near my office to buy my packs of cigarettes for the weekend, and I looked at the product and I said, let's see what happens if I don't buy cigarettes this weekend. And Monday came. I didn't smoke in the whole weekend, and I never looked back. And a few months after that, I start reading and reading. I was reading so much about vaping, and I say, this is so obvious. Why it's banned in Mexico? I mean, if the Congress people knew about this, they are going to regulate it pretty fast. I am still waiting for that, but I am sure they will. I am sure they will. Yeah. Thank you, and thank you for TPA.
Thank you very much.
You're most welcome. Very
Nice one. Cheers.
So we have some questions that Courtney and Kara have gotten online, but so Jeannie, we have a question for you if you want to come up. And while you make your way up to the stage, I'm going to ask a question to Martin.
Right.
Is using celebrities to help our cause. You know, we have to tell stories. And yeah, the stairs are over. It's important for us to tell stories and to get people's attention. And one of the questions was, have you considered using celebrities, famous people to advocate for vaping? And do we have anyone that is?
Yeah, there's plenty of celebrities. They've been pictured in Hollywood. I'm terrible for names of Hollywood superstars because I don't really watch much
Would say
telly.
Leonardo
You know
DiCaprio
them.
vape.
Leonardo DiCaprio, that's one of them. Yeah, they're pictured
Someone should
regularly.
get Ben Affleck a vape.
And another thing I find is, especially in UK dramas, you see people using e-cigarettes in UK dramas quite regularly. And again, that's proof that this is a cultural change we're seeing here. Is that they still have people smoking in those dramas, but increasingly you're seeing people who write these dramas seeing vaping devices in the UK as part of everyday life. And that always encouraged me because we see that. And I always hope that people watch that, and if they are a smoker, makes them think, maybe I'll try one of those because that person gets on with it. But yeah, they turn up in celebrity. You often see newspaper articles in the Daily Mail and the tabloids often saying, oh, we've seen this person with a vape or whatever. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think it's a very good thing. Whether we could actually get a celebrity to actively advocate, I don't know. But if anyone knows one, do let us know, because we would love to explore any avenue in that direction.
Yeah, and just a few months ago in the United States, an American football coach of the Miami Dolphins, he was caught vaping on the sideline. He took a hit, and it was a mini scandal. I thought fantastic. I mean, go for it. But
What about the vaping congresswoman?
And we have a vaping congresswoman. So we do have a question for you, Jeannie, and this comes from our live stream. Someone sent this in. As a UN-affiliated organization, are the WHO, FCTC held to the same ethics and standards in their work as other UN-affiliated organizations?
Do you want to come over here, Jeannie?
Oh, okay, come in. Well, yes. Yes, I mean, under the Vienna Convention and various other, they, as a UN body, they are, like all of them are. The problem is that the WHO had no experience in negotiating treaties, and when this first started, they, as I said, they were new at it. They were so bad at it that they had to bring in 2 WTO ambassadors, Seixas Correa and Celso Amorim from Brazil, to actually conclude the FCTC, because they didn't know what they were doing. They were health officials, not diplomats. The problem that occurs is that no one really is scrutinising the WHO about this sort of activity. When I used to work in those areas for the Australian government a long time ago, if you held the passport of a country that was in the negotiation, you could go in and watch it from the public gallery. And very early on, I used to go down there all the time between 2000 and 2003, and even the early COPs, you know, using that same sort of taking people along to so they could learn and watch about the experience. What has happened, though, is, and I used to write about this a lot, is that no one was pushing back on the WHO in terms of what it's doing, and that still doesn't happen. If you talk to people in WTO or any of the other bodies, they don't understand it. They don't even believe it. It's really hard to convey to them that this is actually happening. I think the worry is that if the longer it goes on, it sort of becomes what's called customary. Customary international law develops, and that becomes what occurs in the WHO. So it is not normal. The WHO is doing this because there's no body above them. There's no one telling them that they can't do it. The only ones that can tell them that they can't do it are the national governments that are members of the WHO, and they don't do that. Canada, as I mentioned to somebody, did stand up originally when they were trying to close the public gallery, but no other governments supported Canada, and over time that's just become the normal process. So the only way to open up these things to scrutiny and to have others, from consumers to the public, anyone of the public who wants to observe, then it requires governments to say we want that and other governments to support them. Having said that, they are government processes, in a sense. Governments go into these to negotiate, and it is, you know, a place for governments. But what they have done is enabled NGOs and international NGOs to go into them as well, that carry a lot of weight and persuasion of their arguments to often the officials who are in there. So even though they come from a health department, they may know nothing about this particular issue. They're in the desk job doing the health job. They get to go to Geneva or to Panama to participate, but it's just the next thing in their on the agenda. So I think there is room to change it, but it's become so entrenched now that it will be hard, but it's not impossible.
Thank you very much. And if we didn't think we couldn't change it, we wouldn't be here. That's why we're here. And the WHO obviously has had a history of misinformation just recently, 2020 with COVID, when they tweeted out that it couldn't be transmitted. It was an airborne transmission, and we all know that was wrong. So I have a question for Lindsay and also Grant from NTU, if you want to come up real quick. It's a tax question. So the question is, should government base taxation on the risk assessment of products? Grant, let's go with you first.
I think that's a complicated question. I think that when you look at tobacco and nicotine products, I think it's very important that government agencies do not tax some of these harm-reducing products, whether it's vapes or nicotine pouches, at the same level as tobacco. But also when looking at tobacco and cigarettes, you have to make sure that you strike the correct balance where you're not creating an illicit market. There's a certain point of no return where you raise taxes so high that government agencies, you see this in the United States with states, are actually collecting less taxes than they had previously at lower rates. So I think it's important to find those important marks and make sure that we make these products available and don't equate them to the same as tobacco.
Thank you. Lindsay?
I mean, I would recommend not taxing tobacco products, actually, because you find governments then being reliant upon the revenue coming from those taxes. I know that we've seen in the States where Michigan used its money that was coming in from later tobacco settlement payments, and this is not tax, but it's money, excise related. They've sold it out on a bond, so they're like in the hole, especially even more so because, smoking rates have gradually declined, and what you even see now is they just keep going farther and farther into tobacco taxes and increasing them. And again, it's almost like policymakers think that they're getting big tobacco back by taxing these products, but they're unfortunately taxing the lower income, lower educated people who are using these products. So relying on the lungs of smokers for revenue gain is just not very good. I'm sorry, people who smoke.
And remember, companies don't pay taxes. Consumers pay taxes, whatever that tax may be. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. So Martin, this is for you. Something we've talked about this week is, what about the new advertising campaigns like the Spanish cancer flavor fake vape?
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's just disreputable, isn't it? It's just really, really shoddy. And like I said, I mean, it's not really an advertising campaign so much as it's a scare story, isn't it? And the guy, I think he was Secretary of State for Health in Spain, he should be thoroughly ashamed of himself. And the WHO and FCTC, if they've not taken them to a side room and given them a good old telling off, then they're really not a serious organisation, are they? I mean, that's just scurrilous. And just to put the record straight, online, Cancer Research UK says that nicotine doesn't cause cancer. I don't think the American Cancer Society has ever said that nicotine causes cancer. So it's completely wrong in its entire formation. I mean, it's just wrong, that's all I say.
So let's open it up to anyone here. Any questions about the conference? Just feel free to jump in.
Any questions you want to ask our experts?
Yeah.
Or ask each other?
Yeah, what have you taken out of it?
Come on up,
Come on
Roberto.
up.
I'm sure
Roberto,
you...
come on. Yeah, just think of anything you've taken from this week, any ideas that you think you've picked up, other thoughts.
The main question was if there is a plan to continue. Like now we are all energized and happy and blah, 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 but time goes on and then we go back home, the normal activities and so on, and I think we should have some sort of plan. I'm not saying that to decide it today, but we should plan for a continuation. The next COP is in 2 years, right?
Next year is what it should be, because this was
2025.
postponed,
Yeah,
so this
but
must be from last year.
Year and a half.
Yeah, let's have something earlier. At least at the very least, that we have a Zoom meeting all together and to report what's going on, what's new, to give some follow-up. That's my suggestion, my question also.
Yeah, come on.
Maria, come on.
Well, you got to come up here, Maria.
Oh, sure.
We don't have a roving
It's
camera.
easier for the camera.
We had vape expos, 9 times a year? 9 times a year we've had vape expos where we went there, all this stuff. We can't have one of these 1 time a year in the U.S., maybe one in Mexico. Well, you guys did one last year in Mexico. I'm not saying that. But think about it. Like, we would get together and, the ECCs in 2014, 2015, 2016, we got together as community to talk, to sell products, to see crazy stuff. So at the beginning it was a little crazy, but there's no reason that we can't do that same thing getting together now to talk about how to keep the industry growing in a very different way, because it's the regulations and fair, equitable regulations that are not going to put burden on consumers and people who smoke, and you've said it, some of the most marginalized communities, and we can continue that. Just we're not testing juice and doing cloud comps.
Well, Maria, let me tell you, if you're familiar with the singing group, The Carpenters, we've only just begun.
Oh, I know the song.
Yes.
Also, we can use all the existing framework. Like there is a GFN, and there are several other events of this type, and we could ask for a chapter on WHO watching, COP watching, because they also do things. The WHO is always producing stuff, right? So we can collect this stuff and use the existing framework to have a chapter on WHO watching. Yeah,
Fantastic. Thank you. And I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but here's a really interesting question for maybe one of the scientists, doctors in the room. How do you respond to people who accuse e-cigarettes of being a gateway to cigarettes for young people? Is there anyone that, Dr. Palooza?
I do respond. I respond just to look at federal data, just to look at the, all the survey that are done nationally, and they will tell you for sure what is the trend. And the trend is simply that people the young people are not smoking anymore. So where's the gateway? There may be some gateway. One gateway in, maybe 1% and 99% gateway out. So if you want to defend the gateway, yes, you can on a theoretical basis. But to cut a long story short, just look at the data of the federal government of any nation. Just look at the survey, and the answer is there. Youth smoking is going to be eradicated. I can estimate in 10, 20 years, at least in the westernized countries. That's going to be a fact. Check it out.
And that's great news, but no thanks to the World Health Organization that we have a decline in smoking.
Yeah, that's another story.
And a very long one.
Yeah, very long one.
For example, in Mexico, where there is a prohibition, I think there is still some gateway. Because if you are a teenager or whatever, and you are exploring, electronic cigarettes are everywhere, right? The distribution of cigarettes is much wider than the distribution of vapes. Therefore, I think there is gateway and in or out constantly, but it is also lack of regulation.
I think Rohan has put his hand up to speak. Thank you, Ricardo. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Very interesting question. This was the basis of the entire ban in India. Youth vaping, right? That was the whole thing that they took, and they flogged and flogged and flogged the donkey till the donkey died. And they said, because of the youth who are coming to vape, this is going to be banned. The first and foremost thing was the proposal which we had told them to apply was if you really want to ban it, there is another alternative, is make vapes available in pharmacies as an OTC, over the counter, right? Not as because you're selling nicotine patches, you're selling nicotine chewing gums as an OTC. You don't require prescription for that. But the pharmacist has a control on whom he can sell this to. So you can't just walk into a pharmacy and say, I want to buy a sleeping pill, I want to buy lorazepam, I want to buy clonazepam. You require a prescription for that. But if you have it as an OTC, there is a gateway control that you walk to the pharmacy. You don't have to go to a cigarette shop. You just walk to a pharmacy. I want to buy a disposable vape, or I want to buy liquid nicotine. Buy it from a pharmacy. You have a gateway control over there. Use it, because it is existing in every city, in every country, all over India. But unfortunately, that did not work. So if they speak about gateways, they are responsible for it available right now all over the streets, and they are the ones responsible because of bad policy decisions where it is available to kids as young as 5 years old. There are kids who are 5 years old who are vaping in India because their colleagues are vaping, and if the reason, if you want to find out for this mess, is because of the policy. If they had just made it available as an OTC, at least that gap would have been much, much, much wider.
So what you're saying is a gatekeeper.
Yes, again, you have the infrastructure.
Yeah.
Utilize it. You're selling vitamins, you're selling nicotine patches, you're selling chewing gums, which you don't require a prescription for. You have the network, you have pharmacies all over the country. In the deepest interiors of the country, there is a pharmacy. Utilize that resource rather than just going the other way and illegalizing it and then having it available to kids as young as 5.
I mean, that sounds like a happy medium, right? Is that it's not widely available to kids, but it's also behind but over the counter.
Absolutely, because it's ridiculous. You're saying you're using that excuse to ban a product when you have the ability to make it available to people who need it and deny the availability to a population group who cannot use it.
But
Does it make sense?
But an excuse is exactly what it is. That's the problem.
It is an
isn't
excuse,
it?
right?
Yeah.
Do we have another question? You can go ahead.
Yeah, this is good. I don't know who's asked this question, but it's for you, Will. It's putting you on the spot, so you've got to come up and answer this. Question for Will Godfrey, please. I'm waiting. I'm going to ask it when you're on the stage, so you can't escape.
Might be a skip question, actually.
Of all the entities on the side resistant to tobacco harm reduction, if you could make one go away, which person, regulatory authority, or NGO would you choose?
Yeah, I mean, it would have to be, we had a conversation about this in several of the panels this week. I think Bloomberg funding impacts so many different areas of this field, so many different countries, including countries in the global south where, where most people who smoke in the world live. It has an incredibly negative impact, publicity-wise, policy-wise. I would like that to go away.
Yes.
So at the beginning of the week, I promised you this would be a conference of the people. I hope we delivered with that. I hope we were a counterbalance to what is happening on the other side of this city. And with that, I think we're going to wrap up. Martin and Lindsay, do you have any last words?
No.
Yeah, I've got last one. I just want to thank all of you for coming. I've said repeatedly on RegWatch and in panels that I'm so proud of the lineup we've got. I'm so proud of all of you for coming here. You're all experts. You've all done a fantastic job. The panels have just gone seamlessly. There hasn't been dead air or anything. And I think you should all give yourself a round of applause now first. And secondly, I'd like to just shout out for the people who couldn't make it here, but all said, wish you the very best of luck. People like Clive Bates, who couldn't make it, David Sweena, who couldn't make it. We had, for the previous iteration of this, we had Uche and Joel from Africa who couldn't make it. We had Janine in Canada who couldn't make it. I mean, we could have had 2 conferences of people if it wasn't so difficult to get to. Nancy Lucas wanted to come. You know, people all over the world. Sinclair Davison, yeah, there were people who just couldn't make it, but all of them sent their best wishes and wished the conference it was a massive success. And I think it has been. And I'm considering it seemed so daunting at the time when David just said, we're going to Panama, and me and Lindsay went, oh, God, you know. Yes. I think it's worked out pretty well. So thanks everyone for coming.
Yes, thank you very much.
Yes, thank you all. Thanks for rolling with everything. I really appreciate that. It's kind of what we had to do, just rolling with the punches. And with the WHO is pushing out. So I imagine, too, that you'll see your name spread a lot in media over the next few weeks, you know, to counter us. So good luck.
That's a wrap.
That's a wrap.